So hi, my name's Andy Day. I'm the founder and CEO of Capital A, and this is our weekly M&A Q&A. And we've got our first guest for you, which is Dom Hawes, who's the CEO of Selby Anderson. So Dom is actually one of our clients, and the reason why I wanted to get him in front of you is because he's probably making some of the fastest acquisitions I've seen, particularly for a company of his size. So he's building an agency group of highly specialized marketing companies that want fast growth. And the business is only 2 years old and they've already made 8 acquisitions. So I think one of the reasons why this is going so quickly is that Dom has a very clear approach himself to making offers, valuing the businesses and getting those acquisitions closed up. So we're going to delve into what it is that he's doing that's helping him do this so quickly and has given him this excellent track record in such a short space of time. So hi Dom, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, very good, thanks Andy, and hi guys, nice to meet you.
Great. So just kick off very quickly with a quick background check on you then, Dom, and find out how it is that you got started in this whole marketing world before you actually came into M&A.
Well, yeah, so my second career was in marketing. I started actually in the British Army. I did 6 years in the army. And when I left there, I made the transition into marketing, which was not an easy route. So I did basically odd jobs for a year and a half. But that was a long time ago, and things worked pretty well from there. So I spent 6 years in agency originally. Started out in PR, but then I moved more into broader marketing consultancy, and ended up doing a lot of kind of marcoms and marketing consultancy just before the millennium. I jumped ship like everyone else did at that stage to go and join a .com. But I swapped sides pretty quickly and joined an incubator fund, venture capital incubator fund, where we started 16 companies. I was there as their VP marketing. So I helped people with business plans and getting up and running. So the kind of entrepreneurial and venture and the kind of finance side, I guess, started there. I then set up and built my own company over about 6-8 years, which we sold. That went really badly. I mean, in fact, went really, really badly. I'm the guy who thought he'd sold a company, but ended up having to sell his house. So, and I've just written a chapter in a book about that. Actually, funny enough, it's how it can go badly wrong. But that's kind of an important driver about how we got to where we are right now. So I then that was 2012. That all unwound and went really badly wrong. So I licked my wounds, went consulting probably for 5-6 years, and then came back in to set out to do something I've kind of tried to do in 2014, but I didn't really have my mojo, if I'm honest. So I wanted to go and build a group of agencies. I always saw marketing as my home territory, but I didn't have any money, and I didn't have any agencies to buy. I just had a business plan, and I didn't have an agency of my own. So I thought, well, so my starting point was to try and, I'll set up an agency, but it ended up being a consultancy. I fell into that dreadful trap of being one person who spends all their time working on clients, so you can't look for new ones. But one of the clients I worked with was a property mogul, and throughout the process of what I'd done, I'd got pretty good at Excel modeling. In fact, really good at Excel modeling, building kind of really detailed models with lots and lots of bells and whistles. What ifs. So investors like what ifs. What if this happens? What if interest rates go up? What if your rate of growth isn't so fast? What if the companies are bigger, smaller? So I built all those levers in for this guy, right? So I did a big piece of work for him, and he then asked me to do a project with him, acquiring 3 companies for him. And then, as luck would have it, I was at a party and a friend said, "Why are you doing this for him? Why didn't you do it for yourself?" I thought, did I light bulb moment? Yeah, if I can do it for him, I can do it for me. So for me, the missing link was they run a structure they call opco propco, where an operating company delivers all the services and a property company owns all the stuff. And when a partner comes in to invest for them, they come in and they take ownership of the propco, but not the opco, if that makes sense. And so I originally thought, well, why don't we structure a marketing services group exactly the same way? Why don't we go out and try and find investors to invest in the assets, but we'll deliver the services in and own those? And that was the way originally I thought we'd go about doing this. It's not how it panned out, actually, but that was the original plan.
So I noticed that Selby Anderson was the acquirer to your consultancy business. I've seen that somewhere. So how did that?
Yeah. So well. So both Simon and I had businesses. Simon had bought a business called Keen, and I had Davidson Hawes, which wasn't really going anywhere, if I'm honest. But I needed to take the intellectual property rights. So I bankrolled the development of Selby Anderson through my other company. And I just needed a clean way of bringing all of that stuff into the new entity.
Right.
But that just transferred. I mean, it didn't need to be done, if I'm honest. I could have done, and I could have not done it. So the acquisition of those two things wasn't anything significant.
So Selby Anderson essentially was a clean sheet of paper for you to do this.
Yeah, it was a
being in
totally clean vehicle.
So I know you made a couple of smaller acquisitions right at the start. Almost like a practice run to some degree, but I know there was issues with those as well. So can you tell us about the very first acquisition?
So the first thing I needed to do was sort out some funding, and my first place to look was debt, because obviously it's the most efficient way of funding anything. So I did a deal where they were going to fund acquisitions using confidential invoice discounting and cash flow loans. Then I started making posts on LinkedIn saying I'm looking to buy marketing agencies, and that was my only outlet to start. I literally just did LinkedIn posts. But every time I posted, I may not have got an agency, but I got a lead, someone who knew someone who thought they had something. And bit by bit, I started to get a pipeline. In June 2018, I sent in their analysts to go and have a look at the business. So as a bank, they're going to want to check all the details before they do the invoice discounting or release any cash against future cash flows. And they came out saying, "God, this is a really great business, good deal. We'll definitely back this." A week later, they completely reversed their position, said, "No, we've had an internal meeting and we've decided that this is being recorded. You better bleep out the real names here." I forgot this is being recorded. It didn't happen that way.
I'll bleep them out.
Could you bleep it out? Yeah. So there was a bank, right? The bank changed their mind, and it was awkward because by that stage, the owner of that agency's explained to their team what's going on, and no one wants to say, "Hey, we're selling to someone," because clients and staff may leave. So we decided we were going to have to go equity only, and started looking at a fundraise. Again, through a bit of LinkedIn, I managed to meet through a contact, a family office, and I had the model, right? And the model was what I needed to be able to illustrate that this was a business that could create significant value. And they had their accountants look at it and said, "Yeah, we agree." And we pretty much agreed in principle, I think, to do something very quickly, a week to 10 days. But it took 6 months to get the paperwork done. So this is June, July time. So and by that stage, I had 2.5 agencies that wanted to sell. And then we finally drew down the first tranche, I think December the 14th, and completed the first acquisition on December the 17th, I think 3 days later. So the first agency we bought was a small one. It only had 7 or 8 people in it. And we were at that stage trying to buy standalone agencies. And that was a mistake. It's too small, right? So if you want to buy an agency to bolt on, I think that's fine. But a standalone agency of 7 or 8 people is too small, because a slight wobble and they just don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the resilience to recover. And in addition, if you're like me, so we had right from the start, we had an ethos of not interfering with the agencies. So we're acquiring them, but we allow them to keep their culture, they keep their MO, everything about them stays the same. Just the ownership changes, and we take care of all the back office operations for them. But right from the start with this one, there was a client, a big client of theirs wobbled. So, the really big lesson straight off, we already knew about things like client concentration. I was too close to the deal, if I'm honest. So when the question inevitably came about, okay, they've got a client concentration problem. I think this one client was 30% of their revenue, something like that. I said, yeah, but that's mitigated by, we made mitigating arguments. And on paper, that looked great. In reality, that client had no intention of spending any money with this agency beyond about 3 months. So what happened was we acquired the agency, the client withdrew, things started to go wrong, and the owners didn't want to or couldn't, for whatever reason, dig in and get that agency out of the hole. So that was a real baptism of fire, the very first one we made. Other things that if you are acquiring, you'll have to deal with is, which again, we've learned along the way through a couple of businesses, where you've got a situation where there's an owner of a business and they run it, whether they're lifestyle or not, they're probably lifestyle, right? So if you get an agency to 10, 12 people and it stays there, it's stable, it can put a lot of money in the owner's pocket. And there's nothing wrong. By the way, I very much admire lifestyle businesses because it takes an enormous amount of discipline to build and maintain a business like that at 10, 12 people. You get to a tipping point, it's very hard to stay there. So I very much admire them, but they behave in certain ways, right? So the owner of a lifestyle business or an owner managed business of 10 or 12 people is still probably involved in most decisions. You have to be, right? And I've been there myself. That's where I was with the business that I built, and I didn't make the same mistake this time. But at that sort of 10 to 12 person point, you're still involved in absolutely everything. So the next bit of received wisdom is that as you move on, you've got to train a number two, right? But when you train a number two, don't train them to be you. Or when you go to look at agencies to acquire, don't look at people that have trained their number two to be just like the number one. And this is what we found, that in most small privately owned businesses, the owners are training their replacements to be them, to have a finger in every pie. And actually, if you want to grow that agency when it comes in, what you want is the opposite. You want people who aren't going to make all the decisions. You want people who are going to let their team make the decisions. That's like the number one biggest cultural issue to unpick if you acquire an agency. Is if you're merging it into your own, I think maybe that's slightly different because they're going to have to embrace your culture. But if you want to acquire an agency and it be a standalone, then that's a really important lesson to learn.
Right. So let's just recap on that, because we've had a couple of people just drop in now. So
guys,
you basically you started with this first acquisition after some challenges by going to a serendipitous introduction to a family office, by going to this family office, and they agreed, once you'd showed them a model of this business and how well it could do, they agreed to finance you, to give you this cash for the first acquisition. So the first acquisition went a bit rocky because they had a concentration on one client, and once that client left, it made it very difficult for them to be profitable. So after that, so you've made several acquisitions since then. Taking what you've learned, what is it now that you do to structure a deal so that it goes in your favor, Selby Anderson?
Yes. Yeah, so we changed, I mean, mainly actually our approach to due diligence. Well, we did two things. One is for standalone acquisitions, we changed our criteria. So we only look at slightly bigger agencies, because if an agency is too small as a standalone, it ain't going to survive. It just won't. As soon it's quite a big transition. I think I underestimated that. So we looked at bigger agencies. The key thing when you make an acquisition is what you're actually buying is people. The one thing you don't get to see is people, right? Because no one's going to let you go in and interview their people. So you're taking a hell of a lot on trust, You can look at the client list, but you don't really know what work they're doing for their clients. You don't know that. You know they've got them as clients, but they could be doing fulfillment, not design, right? So we, and there's a video out there somewhere on LinkedIn actually, we changed our due diligence process so that we run a workshop now as part of due diligence, where a third party goes in, very competent third party goes in and runs a one-day strategy workshop with the agency that we're looking to acquire. It's normally on the next 12 months business strategy. We pay for it, and it must deliver real value to the agency. It has to be something that they can extract value from. But while that's going on, the facilitators are looking at how the relationships work, how the people work, who's proactive, how ambitious are they. So we then get a report on the agency out of the back end, if you like, of the workshop. And now this company's doing workshops like this, by the way, up and down the country all the time. So just because an agency, if anyone's watching this and their agency's met them, doesn't mean a thing.
But kind of like a secret shopper, but only.
That's exactly it. So we just asked them to operate like they normally operate, but in this case, we're paying the bill. That gives us insight into the people that are going to be running the business. The second thing that's really easy to do as part of due diligence is ask to see sight of both purchase and sales invoices for 60 days, because you can bluff the services you're delivering to a potential acquirer, but you can't do that to your customer because they'll just reject the invoice. So ask to see original invoices for 60 days and look at the copy and what they're actually invoicing their clients for. You'll very quickly understand the nature of the relationship that the agency has with its clients. So they're the kind of the two key learnings I think that we took out of the first one.
Okay, so one of the questions that we get asked a lot is how to finance acquisitions, obviously, and it seems like you are kind of lucky, but did very well right from the
You make
start.
your own luck. You
Yeah,
always make your own luck, Andy.
of course. Well, you're asking the right people the right questions on LinkedIn.
So financing a deal isn't actually as hard, I think, as a lot of people think. So it depends on kind of how you want to do the deal and what you want to get out of it, really. So the typical structure, and I'm sure that Andy's probably covering this. The typical structure is a certain amount of cash at closing and the rest delivered over a 2 or 3 year period. So the big networks will go longer than that. So the way I tend to look at transactions is that we're and it's just a bit of spin, but it's a good mindset to have, that we're engaged in the process of releasing the value that agencies have built over the years they've been running them. And that is a process that happens over time. So the closing consideration typically in a deal will be somewhere between 35 and 50% in our case, depending on the agency, the desire of the owners, that kind of stuff. So, but I think we have a slightly different way of valuing or creating structures than often people we compete against for deals. The premise, so the neat thing about doing a deferred deal like that, particularly if there's an earnout on the back end, so 2 types of deferment: a fixed deferment where they say, where someone says, we don't want to take any risk, we know exactly what we want to earn, and you pay them a fixed amount over that period. You'll warrant it against revenues probably, but it's a fixed amount over 3 years. That's okay, but you're taking, as an acquirer, you're taking a much bigger risk on that transaction than the vendor. A much better transaction from my point of view is an earnout where uncapped and uncollared. So no top cap and no collar on the bottom to guarantee a minimum amount. So it is what it is, right? So that's the best way of releasing value, is to give people the value they create. And so in those sorts of structures, the amount that you're looking for up front is balanced by your need to minimize the amount of cash you're putting down on day one, and their need not to take too much because they're getting an upside off what they're getting in years 1, 2, and 3 on the earnout. And there's a very, very nice equilibrium then between what you're trying to do and what they're trying to do. And the transaction for us then typically comes out at around 35 to 40%. And I will say our dealings and all of these things, our starting point is always the word fair, right? What's fair? What looks like fair value? What looks like a fair transaction? There's literally no point in trying to nickel and dime anybody. So it's about trying to find a fair way of releasing what we see as the real value of their agency. And that's kind of, and you mentioned that we do lots of deals, it's because we're fair, right? If we say we'll do something, we do it. So if you look at, I mean, I don't know what size of deals you guys would be looking at, but if you look at an agency, let's say that's doing, let's pick a small one with round numbers because that makes the maths easier. Let's say they're doing 100 grand in EBIT, 100 grand in adjusted EBIT at absolute standard industry markup. Let's say 3.5, 4 times, something like that, is going to make that agency worth, doing 100 grand is going to make them worth 400 grand, let's say. Okay, so that's what we call our current value. If they don't change, if they deliver 100 grand for the next 3 years, that agency is worth 400 grand because that's the cash flow it's delivering. And the goodwill, of course, is about what future cash flow it's going to bring into the group. So of the 400 grand, and by the way, that agency probably is doing about 450 or 500 in revenues because they probably should be doing 15 to 20% in EBITDA, somewhere around there, 15, 20, 22, 23, which you'd hope to improve, I guess. So of that 400 grand, let's say we're paying 30% up front. Why did I do that for? Okay, so it's 120 down, right? So it'll be 120,000 pounds down. So the first place to look for finance, unless you've got your own cash, so if you've got your own cash to deploy, it's the most efficient way of doing it, always, right? Because it's yours, you already own it. The first place to look otherwise, probably, in that case, it's not going to work because they're too small, but if it's a bit bigger, is invoice discounting. That would be my first place to look. It's easy, it's secured, there's very rarely a personal guarantee involved.
And that's against the target, right?
Against the target, yes. And you need to discuss this, obviously, with the owner of the target and say, look, we're needing this as part of the deal finance. We're looking at releasing some value of the business in the following kind of way. So that's the first way. No, we were in a position that we didn't have to. This is exactly the route I was going down. If they're of a certain size and they have enough throughput on cash flow, you may find lenders, maybe not on the high street, but you may find some alternative lenders that, in addition to doing invoice discounting, will also advance you cash against cash flow, right? So if they've got enough cash flow going through the business, and you can normally get quite a long way towards your closing consideration doing that. Normally, in our case, obviously, we'd raised the money, so we didn't need to do that. So you've got to have some money, but the financing of it is not huge, you know.
So it's that, and then I mean there aren't any sexy answers really for this this sort of smaller end of the market, and debt obviously is the next approach. So you would go to a business bank or to your business, wherever you're banking with the business, and just explain what it is you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So and look, that's no different at the scale we're trying to operate at the moment either. You know, the strength of your banking relationship is really important. And if you haven't already borrowed some money from your bank, borrow some straight away and make sure you repay it. Because when you go to borrow,
that's least complicated, because you're not giving away any equity in the business.
So debt's always a good place to go. So one of the problems with most people when they go to the bank, if you run a business and you've never borrowed money from the bank, it's great to say we've never been in debt, but the bank has no idea about how good you are at repaying debt. And we're slightly in that position. So we're going to a bank saying we'd like to borrow some money, and the bank's going, you've got no debt record. So I'd almost advise people, whether you need it or not, borrow some money off the bank, show them you can repay a term loan. Then when you need to go and borrow a decent amount of money, they'll look up their history and see that you've got a good track record. But banking, I would say that your bank and your relationships you have are always number one. Number two, there are a load of alternative lenders out there that will look at things like this. And I went through a slew of them. I didn't need them in the end, but there are a load of alternatives out there.
When you say alternative lenders, give us some examples.
So they're specialists. I mean, you look them up on Google. So independent invoice discounting companies, for example, independent kind of boutique corporate finance companies that will help in M&A, small M&A, management buyouts, that kind of stuff. There's a load of them online. Look, they're not cheap, but it's cheaper than equity. And you know, at some stage, you've got to have some skin in the game of your own.
So tell us about the family office deals. I mean, you've obviously got something in place. So how is that structured so that they get the benefit? Are they loaning you money, or are they?
Unfortunately, the precise details of ours are confidential. Unfortunately.
Yeah, just as an example of how that would work.
Well,
very general.
No, I can explain in broad content. Look, if you're going to borrow a lot of money from somebody, if you're going to raise a lot of money, and we're talking, you know, several millions, the rules are different. Actually, they're just different. So I've raised money into companies, I think 3 times. 2 on a very traditional route, where you're raising seed capital and then you go for a Series A and you do that kind of stuff. And in that instance, you start with 100% of the equity and you have a horse trade over who's going to get what. Where you go in straight off the bat to take many millions, and it's a different for this kind of operation. It's a different setup. It's much more like an opco propco. So, and I described that at the beginning, right? So, in an opco propco, the property company will largely be owned by the investor, and the person that is running that propco will be rewarded based on what they do with the assets that have been invested.
Okay.
That's how an opco propco model, or a general partner arrangement like that would work.
Okay.
It's not too different from how we're working.
So just a little bit of advice about starting those types of relationships, because one thing I say is actually M&A isn't really about maths and spreadsheets. It's more about networking and relationships, and it's very much about the humans involved in the maths. So just any advice generally about putting yourself out there and making connections?
Well, LinkedIn's really good, actually. I have to say, LinkedIn's very good. I've tried approaching. Are we talking for deal flow or finance or both?
Both sides, really. Just
okay. So I'll do deal flow first. So deal flow is LinkedIn's really good for, because It just is. It's a good post. You know, I'm looking to buy a business of the following kind. People like sharing that stuff. If you know, if they've got a friend who's got a business that they know is trying to sell, and a lot of the leads that we get, and to buy the 7-8 that we have, I've probably looked at 100 and I've got 180, I think now, or 200 agencies. There's a lot of volume out there. A lot of people for sale. So the first thing is, I would say that's a good place to start. I would avoid, unless you are a particular kind of masochist, the really big brokers. They'll have lots of agencies for sale, but they're just really hard to deal with, and you waste a lot of time. I wasted hours doing that.
Too expensive or in trouble. Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Much better to do the networking side. But there are also alternative places you can look. Like if you've already got good relationships with marketing recruitment people in your specialist area, speak to them, because they're the people. If you own an agency and you want to find someone to replace you, that's where you go. So recruitment companies know who is trying to move on or who is trying to replace themselves or find an MD. And we actually found one of our agencies through a recruitment consultant. So they're recruiters, accountants, lawyers, those sorts of people are really good, kind of slightly esoteric route to go. And it's worth just asking, hey, have you got anyone, do you know anyone?
Yeah. And I suppose probably very similar for financial side as well. It's just getting out there. And
the financial side is very similar, yes. So ultimately, you know, you've got to look at the story, actually, because people want to buy a story. They want to buy something they believe in. So it's never just about numbers. If you think about any investor, right, if you're looking for equity investors or an equity partner, they've got a bazillion things they can invest their money in, right? I mean, and this has been the case every time I've raised money. And what they want is a story that they are interested in and a story that they believe in. So if you've got a compelling reason to do what you're doing, and you've got a good story, and you can back that story up with a good plan or a good model or a good something, there's got to be a good something as well. Like the story will get you through the door, and then you need something that's going to give them. So the process they go through when they make these decisions, in my opinion, is they find something they like and they go, right, I want to invest in that, and then they'll start looking for reasons not to. And you just need to be able to knock all those things over one by one. Oh yeah, the guys aren't on top of the numbers. No, we are. Here's a spreadsheet. Yeah, but you haven't yes, we have. You haven't factored this. Yes, we have. So you sort of slightly need to be able to make sure you've got your ducks in a row that way. But in terms of originating, it's about being brazen, I'm afraid, about what you're trying to achieve, and say, you know, if you actually go after what you're trying to achieve, I would avoid crowdfunding, personally. Partly because I think it's very difficult to I did look at it. It's very difficult to crowdfund this kind of deal, and it'll give you a massive headache. I think it'll give you a massive headache further down the line. I don't think for a good agency to go buy another agency, for example, I don't think you need to go there. I think there are plenty of people out there that will fund these sorts of deals.
Okay, and finally, so you obviously had a lot of experience of this very quickly. Once you've got the business and you've acquired them into the group, what's your next steps? Any advice around that, about bringing them into the company and problems that you've had to deal with?
So the way we try and operate now, when a company comes into our group, we don't touch them for 90 days. So obviously we want to meet the people, and obviously we want them to meet us, and we want everyone to be able to ask any questions. It depends on what you're acquiring and why. If you're acquiring a bolt-on, or you're buying volume, or you're going to merge teams, totally different thing. But if you want that company to retain its own culture, it's actually quite a big mind fry going through a transaction like that and having an ownership structure. And people get very insecure very quickly, with reason, understandably. You know, things suddenly, their whole world, which was certain, looks like it's changed. So we try and stay really in the background, apart from obviously being, you know, open to answer any questions that people want, just to let that company come to terms with it, so the client comes to terms with it, because what they find with us is nothing actually really changes. The day before and the day after the transaction are pretty much identical, and the week before and the week after are pretty much identical, and the same for months and quarters and years. So we leave them alone to start with, and our preferred period is 90 days. That just allows them to settle in, but it also allows us to do a lot of planning. So the first things we'll try and bring across, because it is communication tools. So we'd migrate people into our Office 365 tenant, so we can email everybody together and they can all see each other's diaries and all that kind of stuff. And then we'll start introducing systems bit by bit, so contracts kind of need to be novated over. So there is a transfer of undertaking. So whatever terms people have on their existing contracts, you'll have to honor. So we generally reissue contracts within the first. We do reissue contracts within the first 90 days. That kind of doesn't affect things. It's the day-to-day stuff we don't want to change too much. So we're not going to ask them to remove their bookkeeping team or change the way they raise invoices or introduce a new CRM on day one, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we do. So over time, so we take the back office away, right? Because that's the bit that distracts everybody. No one likes sending out. No one likes. Well, some people like sending them out. No one likes. No one gets into the creative business to do bookkeeping.
And
right?
who does that then? Once you centralize that, where does that come from? Is it the first company?
So we started a company to do that called Drumhorse. So Drumhorse provides all of our IT support, all of our bookkeeping, our HR. It does some procurement work across the group for us. So we started an agency to do that. But there are plenty of good bookkeeping firms out there that will, they're very low cost, that will pick up that kind of that can pick up that kind of work and consolidate, charts of account and that sort of stuff. But one of the other big reasons for not doing too much too early on is if there's a big culture shock and things start going south, you don't want the owners of the business you've acquired to turn around and say it's your fault, you changed everything. So for us, if things do start going wrong, you have to be able to, it's not about whose fault it is, but you need to be able to identify the source of the issue if you're going to solve it. And if you're too hands-on and they say it's your fault, all you can do is withdraw. But if that's not the problem, that agency is going to still continue going down. And bear in mind, by this stage, you've given them the closing consideration. So actually, when things start going wrong, you want to double down effort, not remove effort. So it's important, to my mind, to keep things as clean as possible post-transaction. So if there is a wobble, if they lose a client or if a couple of staff start to leave, you can identify the issue and pounce on it nice and fast.
Okay, brilliant. So it's probably a very peppered journey, but you can't go into too much detail, I should imagine, because they're still your staff. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Dom. We're going to have a few questions from everybody in a second. I know that you also do your own podcast. Can you tell us a little bit more about how to stay in touch with Dom? Where can they sign up to newsletters or follow you around the internet?
Sure. So selbyhanderson.com is the website. That's kind of the mothership for all our content. The podcast is on there. It's also on marketingtrek.co.uk. So I'm there. We're on LinkedIn. Please do connect to me on LinkedIn. Anyone who's watching this, you guys, if you'd like to. We're very, very open. So I mentioned at the beginning that I had that disastrous sale of a business. When we founded this, half the reason we did it was to behave in a way that we hoped people had treated us, right? So to prove that you can get on without being a shit in business, frankly. So we're always very straightforward. If you're on this call and you've got a question, I will always answer it. Connect to me on LinkedIn, send me a message there. I'm not going to give out my email address because this might be watched by other people, and I know Andy will probably broadcast it, but connect to me on LinkedIn and I'll give you my email there. I'm in Clubhouse. Who knew Clubhouse could be such a weird thing? Yeah, that's a dangerous place to go. So, but I'm on there. If you are on there, look me up, Dom Hawes, Twitter, all the normal places.
Okay, brilliant. All right. So, anybody would like to ask any questions at this point? Would you like to raise a hand and turn your mic on? I don't think we've got too many people. So, Will, turn your mic on and let's hear your question.
Thanks for that, Dom. It's really good, really useful. In terms of the actual proposition of the group, that you've obviously mentioned that you allow this kind of autonomy to exist and that you can make some kind of economies of scale by taking on the back office operation. What is the vision beyond that? And is that part of what you go to when you go to the target? Or otherwise, what's the offer to the target other than, multiples?
So I mean, people sell for a number of different reasons, obviously. There is a vision beyond and bigger than that. When we started, I mean, these things change over time, right? So the base drivers of why we did it have morphed into something a little bit more sophisticated now, purpose and mission statement. But the root of why we did what we're doing is still there. But the value proposition is different from audience to audience. So from a client point of view, we're trying to build a network of specialists. So we believe the best talent exists in specialists, not generic agencies. We believe the right way for agencies to grow is deep into a niche, not laterally. So it's really hard to be really good at making films, building websites, and doing media relations. They're just different disciplines, they're different businesses. So our sort of mantra is we believe in integration at group level, not at agency level. So we seek to go out and acquire groups to allow us to deliver that. So from a client point of view, we're trying to deliver a super kind of agile and problem-oriented team. So it can come across agency or into each agency, but it's about what the client wants. From an agency owner's point of view, as I said, people have different reasons. Some of them are emotional. Quite a lot of them are emotional, actually. Selling an agency to anyone is a pretty stressful thing to do. So you want to know that the people you're dealing with are honest and transparent and have the best interests of everyone at heart. So that's part of the process we go through normally. Is the first meeting's a chemistry meeting, which is, do we like each other? Because we have to like each other if we're gonna work together. Well, not to become friends or anything, but we have to be able to have a sensible conversation, and we have to share a worldview to some extent, right? I'm not talking politically, but sort of market and how you treat people and that kind of stuff. So that's the first thing. So there's a very personal connection normally. And like all these things, we've got our gut instincts is a distillation of all the things we've learned and all the things we know over the years, and so gut instinct is generally to be trusted, and that's why for me the chemistry meeting is really important. It's hard on Zoom, right? Much easier face to face. But that first chemistry meeting is are these on both sides, is do we think we can work with these people? Beyond that, it's I will spend quite a lot of time actually selling our vision to an agency to say, look, this is why we're doing what we're doing. So I'll talk about our belief in, for us, and obviously for you, it's going to be different depending on what your particular beliefs are. For us, it's a belief in specialism. It's a belief that if someone's worked very hard to build and establish a culture and their name is above the door, they may want to see some legacy. They may want to see that continuing. And that is a really important thing. For me, when I sold my company, the name was taken off the door and they got rid of my board and they changed the product mix and they took all the cash out of it and then they handed it back and said, this thing's broken. No shit, Sherlock, you changed everything. But so we're trying to buy winning formulas and not change them. And that's a reassuring message for a lot of people that have built agencies and want to see them thrive. The second thing that's really important is one's approach to people. And what opportunities the staff from an existing agency would have as part of a larger group. So we're seeing quite a lot of agencies looking to join larger entities because they want scale to continue their own growth as an agency, not just as an entity, but also for their people. So that's, an enlarged presence brings new opportunities. It also, an enlarged presence brings opportunities to do things that you can't as a small agency. So things like, training, centralized training and development, buying power, all that kind of stuff delivers benefits in to people that you can't necessarily get independently. You can in time, obviously, because as long as you keep growing, you get there. But we're seeing a lot of that. I think in COVID we saw a little bit of run for protection. So some people were coming in saying, we're not that sure about the future. I don't think we ended up completing on any of those sorts of transactions, because if someone isn't confident about their agency, kind of why would we be? We like confident people that want to grow. Numbers are always important, but in no case that I've dealt with have the numbers been a primary concern. So this is another key learning actually that I've made along the way. So when I first started, I didn't really like talking about money too much. So I used to leave talking about money to the end. Now I like to do it the other way around. I like to get quite quickly towards what an outline of an offer might look like. And the starting point to me is, what does the total consideration look like? Like, if you hit your forecasts and if this thing works out, this is what I think the deal size looks like. Does that sound good to you? And if they say yes, then we can say how we're going to structure that. If they say no, then I haven't wasted too much time and they haven't wasted too much time. But so typically I would go chemistry meeting, disclosure of financials. I'll say where I think we can play financially. And if I've got it wrong, and it does happen, people come back and say, actually, you got this wrong, we're worth more than that, and this is why, and I can justify it, I'll go, okay, fine, we're prepared to consider that. And then we'll look at how we structure that. So the money thing matters, but it's never been the most important thing with anything I've got beyond the early days. There have been a couple that have just walked away because they want the moon, and that's just not who we are. So
just try and get a few more questions. Does that answer your question, Will? Anything else?
I've got loads, but carry on.
Was there anybody else that had their hand up that I might have missed? Be interested in asking something? Or are we just going to let Will take the floor? Jerry, go on then, Jerry.
Hi, Dom.
hi, Jerry.
Firstly, that was really interesting. Thank you very much. And when you look to acquire businesses, is it always 100%, or would you look at a 51%, 50%?
So we started at 100%. We do look at less now. Again, it very much depends on what you want to do and why you would be doing it. We didn't want to get into the situation where we owned ransom strips in agencies. So we looked at one where we were going to buy 10 and 20, then so we'd literally buy an incremental amount over the years. That didn't work out in the end. We have looked at deal. I wouldn't look at buying as little as 51% personally, because at that level it's quite hard for me, just for what we're doing. It's quite hard to consolidate numbers, and it introduces complexity, and sort of simplicity is one of my most important things. If things get too difficult, we can't do them. The other thing is, as an acquirer, buying the value that you get out of deals comes from leverage. That's why you don't need to worry about negotiating too hard on price, right? So price is important, and it's important that it's fair, but it's the leverage that you put into a deal, how you structure it over those years. That's where you're going to get the value. The break even on a 4x deal is what, 4.5 years, whatever it is, something like that. For you as an investor. But when you do break even and the profits start to accrue, assuming you've managed to keep that unit in, that's where your value is delivered. It's delivered from leverage. Now, it's hard to do that if you're only buying 50% of a business, because assuming you want to buy out the other 50% of the business, at some stage you've got to stick your hand in your pocket to pay for that. So you lose all your leverage by doing that, and it's not just about cost, because it is a more expensive way of doing deals. It's also a lot more risky to do the deal that way for you, because you're effectively taking all the risk on the bit that you buy. Now, from a seller's point of view, it's a very attractive thing to do, obviously. But there's no guarantee you're going to buy the other 49%. So then you're into legal arguments about, do they have a put option? Can they force you to buy it? And if they do, what's the valuation? And if we've grown, what's the multiple going to be when we've grown? So there's a whole load of other complications that come in. That generally, there's enough deal flow out there that if somebody only wants to sell 50%, I'll let them sell it to someone else, to be honest.
So we're seeing with Martin Sorrell of S4 Capital, for instance. He's doing a lot of mergers now. Is that an approach you would take, where you would acquire, well, potentially you would acquire 100% of the business, but you would give some equity in the top co to the businesses that you're acquiring? Is that something you consider?
So we don't. It's not something, it's just not in our business model or in our DNA. I understand it works for some people. For where we are right now, so one of the other issues that I had, and this comes back to received learning. I think I've been a paper millionaire about 4 times in my life with various different option schemes that I've belonged to. And when I sold my company, it was to an American public company, and the acquisition was in shares, and those shares didn't materialize. They turned into nothing. So we just have a very simple maxim where we do cash deals. When we buy a business now, we buy it for money. We don't buy it for shares. And some people don't like that, and some people do. But as I said, there's a lot of volume out there. So if you're looking at making your transactions more cash efficient, then I think putting some equity on the table can be good, particularly if you're trying to do an ambitious acquisition. Then I think that's going to deliver you more value than by acquiring everything for cash. Because you're going to grow that much faster once you've acquired them, then I think that probably works. For where we are and how we're structured, it just doesn't work. But it doesn't mean I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay, brilliant. All right, any more questions, guys? I think we're going to wrap up there. Maybe just one quick one off Will, if we can get a quick...
A quick one was, look, so I get this idea that you talked about a client network of specialists where you want to kind of go deep into a niche, but you're acquiring these businesses and you're letting them run on their own with a high degree of autonomy, at least for the sort of 90 days or what have you. What and how are you investing, or in this idea of actually how do you get this kind of integration and the value from this being a network? How does that work?
So, well, so some of the value is delivered on the back end, obviously through economies of scale. So simply, we are able to get cheaper insurance for everybody because we put all the insurance into one broker. So, and we operate all of the back office. We set up a company in Macedonia where we employ, I think, 8-9 people now, and they deliver brilliant services into the agencies. It's a fabulous place. So we're able to deliver value into the agencies that way. So we're removing cost off the back end. Look, the nirvana for everybody in a group like ours is the agencies collaborate, right? But it's also the hardest thing to do. It's not something that we can mandate from HQ. It's got to be done agency to agency. But if they can get it right, then there's significant value that can be added by agencies collaborating. Now, in our case, because the agencies are standalone, and it's a little bit harder. But I think if you're bringing and merging in, then I think that's probably a lot easier, because and different people do it in different ways. So I mean, there's one group like ours where everyone lives in the same building. We have offices dotted all over the place. It just depends on how you want your culture to be. But that's part of your personal DNA and culture, I think. But so collaboration is nice. We're not doing this to collaborate. We don't need to do this for the collaboration piece. It would be good if people do collaborate. Ultimately, that will happen because we're running business development programs as Selby Anderson, and when we bring and start talking to clients as Selby Anderson, then we'll assemble teams from the agencies. But that will always be led by one of our agencies, not by us. And in doing that, if we're identifying problems that need, at its most basic level, PR and lead gen, we've got one of each of those. So we'd ask people to collaborate on it.
Okay, brilliant. All right, some fantastic answers there. And I'm sure everybody's taken some value away from that. Okay, so make sure everybody gets in touch with Dom via LinkedIn. Then he's happy to take more questions, probably not too many today. And thank you very much, Dom, for your time. It's been absolutely fantastic. I'm sure everybody's learned a load from that, including myself and my team, who've also jumped onto this call as well. So fantastic to see you, and see you again soon. Thank you
Thanks so much, guys.
for attending, and yeah, we'll follow up via email, I'm sure, with extra questions and stuff in the background. Brilliant. Okay, see everybody soon. Have a good Friday. Thanks very much.